Before I tell you what happened in that hospital room in Beirut, I need you to understand something. I was not a woman who believed in miracles. I was a woman who believed in science, in medicine, in the 5 daily prayers I had grown up reciting since I was 4 years old. I believed in Allah with everything inside me, and I had built my entire life around that faith. So when I tell you what I am about to tell you, I need you to know that I am not a woman who makes things up. I am not a woman who exaggerates. I am a medical doctor. I deal in facts. But what happened to me on the night of March 3, 2019, in room 14 of the St. George Hospital in Atrafie, Beirut, Lebanon? That was not something any medical textbook could explain. That was something else entirely. My name is Dr. Fatima Khalil. I was born and raised in the Hamra district of West Beirut, in a 4-bedroom apartment on Rue Makdisi, 3 floors above my uncle's pharmacy. My father, Hassan Khalil, was an engineer. My mother, Nadia, was a school teacher who wore her hijab the way she wore her dignity, with absolute pride and zero apology. I grew up praying, fasting during Ramadan, reading the Quran every morning before school, and believing with my whole heart that Islam was the straight path, the only path, and that anything outside of it was darkness. I became a doctor because I wanted to heal people. I studied medicine at the American University of Beirut, graduated top of my class in 2009, and by 2019, I was a senior internal medicine physician at one of Beirut's most respected hospitals. I wore my hijab under my surgical cap. I prayed in the hospital chapel, the Christian one, because there was no Muslim prayer room, and I kept my prayer mat folded in my locker between my extra stethoscope and my lunch bag. I was 38 years old, and I thought I had everything figured out. Then a man named Pastor Elias was admitted to my ward, and nothing was ever the same again. I want to be honest with you because this testimony is not worth anything if I am not completely honest. When Pastor Elias was first wheeled into my ward on a cold Tuesday evening, my first feeling was not compassion, it was discomfort. And that discomfort came from a place I am not proud of. Pastor Elias was a well-known Maronite Christian pastor who led a large congregation at the Church of Saint Charbel on Gaitalwi Street in East Beirut. He was 64 years old, a big man with white hair, a thick grey beard, and a large silver cross hanging around his neck, the kind that caught the light every time he moved. He had been brought in with severe abdominal pain, elevated liver enzymes, and signs of what initially looked like acute poisoning. His church deacon, a thin, nervous young man named George Rod, had brought him in and was sitting in the corridor outside, clutching a Bible to his chest and whispering prayers so fast they sounded like one long continuous word. I reviewed Pastor Elias's file at the nurse's station before walking in to see him. 57 years of ministry, no significant prior medical history, suddenly critically ill. A toxicology panel was still pending. Something about the presentation was unusual, too sudden, too severe, with a pattern that did not match any common illness I had seen. It looked to my trained eye like it could be deliberate poisoning, but I pushed that thought aside and walked into room 14. He was lying in the hospital bed with his eyes closed, breathing slowly. The cross on his chest rose and fell with each breath. I introduced myself the way I always did, clearly, professionally, without warmth but without coldness either. I told him I was Dr. Fatima Khalil, that I would be his physician, and that I was going to take good care of him. He opened his eyes when I said my name. They were dark brown, very calm, and he looked at me in a way that made me feel, strangely, like he already knew me. He smiled. Not a small, polite smile. A full, warm, unhurried smile. The kind you give someone you have been waiting a long time to see. I ignored the feeling that smile gave me and began my clinical examination. Over the next 48 hours, Pastor Elias's condition worsened. The toxicology results came back, and what they showed made my blood run cold. There were traces of a compound in his bloodstream, a specific combination of substances that did not occur naturally and could not have been accidentally consumed. Someone had deliberately put something into this man's food or drink. It was subtle, professional, and if I had not caught the pattern when I did, it would have looked like organ failure from natural causes within another 72 hours. I reported it immediately to hospital administration and to the police as Lebanese law required. A detective named Ramzi Nassar from the Atrafieh police station came to the hospital that same evening. He was a quiet, serious man in a grey suit, who asked careful questions and wrote everything down in a small notebook. He told me that there had been threats made against Pastor Elias in the weeks before his admission. Anonymous threats, connected, he said carefully, to tensions between certain community groups in the city. He did not say more than that, but he did not need to. That was when the story in the thumbnail you saw became real for me. Because 2 days after Detective Nassar's visit, I received a phone call on my personal mobile number, a number that was not listed anywhere publicly. The voice on the other end was male, calm, and spoke to me in Lebanese Arabic. He told me that I should not be working too hard to save the pastor. He told me that the pastor's illness was meant to run its course. He told me that certain people would be very grateful if I simply managed the case conservatively and allowed nature to take its path. I stood in the hospital corridor holding my phone and I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. He then said something that froze me completely. He said that he knew I was a good Muslim woman. He said that men like Pastor Elias were enemies of true faith. He said that what I would be doing by stepping aside would be a service to God. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, turned on the tap so nobody could hear me, and I stood there gripping the sink with both hands, staring at my own reflection in the mirror. I was a doctor. I had taken an oath, and someone who knew my phone number, someone who knew where I worked, someone who had somehow connected me to this patient, was asking me to let a man die. I looked at myself in that mirror for a long time. Then I dried my hands, straightened my hijab, walked back to the nurse's station, and ordered a full escalation of Pastor Elias's treatment protocol. I was not going to let him die. But I had no idea yet what that decision was going to cost me, or what it was going to give me in return. By the 5th day of Pastor Elias's admission, his condition had stabilized enough that he could sit up in bed and speak in full sentences. The treatment was working. His liver enzymes were coming down slowly. His pain was manageable, and the color was returning to his face. Medically, he was improving. But something else was happening in that room that I could not chart on any graph or record in any clinical notes. Every time I walked into room 14 to do my morning rounds, I felt something. I know how that sounds coming from a doctor. I know how unscientific it is, but I am telling you the truth, and the truth is that there was something in that room that was different from every other room in that hospital. It was not a smell. It was not a sound. It was more like a weight, but not a heavy, oppressive weight. More like the feeling you get when you walk into a room where someone has just finished praying. A stillness, a presence, something that made the air feel thicker and warmer than it should have been. I told myself it was the stress of the situation. I told myself I was tired. I had not been sleeping well since the phone call. I had reported the threatening call to Detective Nassar, who had taken it seriously and assigned a plainclothes officer to the hospital floor. I was looking over my shoulder in the car park. I was checking that my apartment door in Verdun was locked twice before I slept. My mother Nadia kept calling me and asking why I sounded different, and I kept telling her I was fine. I was not fine. On the morning of the 6th day, I arrived at room 14 earlier than usual. It was just after 6 in the morning, before the rest of the ward team arrived for rounds. I wanted to check Pastor Elias's overnight observations myself. I pushed open the door quietly, expecting him to be asleep. He was not asleep. He was sitting up in bed, completely still, with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes open, looking directly at the window. The early morning light was coming through the gap in the curtains and falling across his face in a way that made everything look very quiet and very serious. He turned when I came in, and again that smile. That warm, patient, already knowing smile. I greeted him in Arabic and began checking his chart. He watched me work in silence for a moment. Then he spoke. He said, "Dr. Fatima, can I ask you something personal?" I told him he could try. He asked me if I had been sleeping well. I looked up from the chart. I told him that was not a question I was expecting from a patient. He said he knew. He said he had been praying for me every night since his admission. He said that he had felt very strongly that I was carrying something heavy, and that he wanted me to know that he was aware of the risk I had taken by treating him properly. He said he knew about the kind of pressure that came with cases like his. He did not say how he knew, he just said he knew. He just said he knew. I put the chart down. I looked at this man, the 64-year-old Christian pastor, lying in a hospital bed, still recovering from deliberate poisoning, wearing a hospital gown with a silver cross resting on his chest. And I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. I just stood there. Then he said something that I have turned over in my mind every single day since that morning. He said that he had been praying, and that during his prayers something had been revealed to him. He said it was revealed to him that the person who would save his life was not just a doctor. He said it was revealed to him that she was someone who was searching, even if she did not know she was searching. He said it was revealed to him that God had a plan for her that was bigger than medicine, bigger than religion as she understood it, bigger than anything she had built her identity around. He was looking directly at me when he said all of this. I am a scientist. I believe in evidence. I believe in measurable, repeatable, verifiable truth. And I am telling you that when that man said those words to me, something moved inside my chest. Not a physical movement. Something deeper than that. Something in the very center of me shifted, like a door that had been locked for a very long time had just been touched by a key. I picked up the chart. I told him very professionally that I was glad he was feeling better, that I would review his bloods after the morning lab run, and that he should rest. I walked out of room 14, down the corridor into the stairwell, and I sat on the cold concrete steps between the second and third floor, and I put my face in my hands. I was not crying. I did not know what I was doing. I was just sitting there in the stairwell of St. George Hospital at 6 in the morning, unable to move, with the feeling that something very large and very important was standing just outside the door of my understanding, knocking quietly and waiting for me to answer. I sat there for 11 minutes. I know because I checked my watch when I stood up. Then I straightened my coat, adjusted my hijab, and went back to work. But I was different after that morning. Something had shifted, and no matter how hard I tried to push it back into place, it would not go. 3 nights after my conversation with Pastor Elias, I had an experience that I cannot call a dream because it did not feel like any dream I had ever had before. Dreams fade when you wake up. This one got clearer. I was in my apartment on Rue Zidani in Pradhan. I had gone to bed after Isha prayer. Exhausted, still carrying the weight of everything that had been happening, I fell asleep quickly, which was unusual because I had not been sleeping easily all week. Then I was somewhere else entirely. I was standing in a place that had no walls, no ceiling, no floor that I could identify, but everything was filled with a light that was not painful to look at. It was warm the way sunlight is warm on your face in early spring. And in that light there was a figure standing at a distance. I could not see his face clearly, but I felt something coming from him that I had never felt from any direction in my entire life. It was not happiness exactly. It was something bigger than happiness. It was like every good thing I had ever felt. The pride of graduating medical school, the relief when a critically ill patient turned a corner, the safety of my mother's kitchen on a rainy evening, all of it compressed into one single feeling and multiplied by something I had no word for. The figure did not shout. He did not perform anything dramatic, but he revealed things to me. He let me know that he had been watching my life for a very long time. He let me know that every door that had ever closed on me, every unanswered prayer, every night I had cried and felt that heaven was silent, none of it was abandonment. He let me know that it had all been preparation. He revealed to me that the road I thought I was walking was actually leading me toward him, not away from him, and that he himself had been the one quietly steering it all along. Then he revealed something to me that stopped my breath even in the dream. He let me know his name. I woke up at 3:17 in the morning, sitting straight up in my bed, completely awake, with tears running down my face and my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I turned on the bedside lamp. I sat there in my bedroom in Verdun, in the city of Beirut, in the country I had lived in my whole life, and I felt like a complete stranger to everything I had ever known about myself and about God, because the name He had revealed to me was not the name I had been taught, and I did not know what to do with that. The morning after that experience, I went to work and functioned like a normal human being on the outside. I reviewed patients, attended a departmental meeting, signed discharge summaries, and ate lunch alone in my office, but inside I was completely undone. I kept thinking about the name. I kept thinking about the light. I kept thinking about that feeling, that enormous, overwhelming feeling, and how nothing in 20 years of Islamic practice had ever produced anything close to it. Not Ramadan, not Hajj, which I had performed at 31 with my mother, not any night of tahajjud prayer in the quiet darkness of my bedroom. Nothing had ever felt like that. I want to be careful here because I am not saying Islam gave me nothing. I am saying that what I experienced that night was something I had never encountered before from any direction, and it was pointing me somewhere specific. That afternoon, I went to Pastor Elias's room for evening rounds. He was sitting up reading. When I came in, he looked at me and his expression changed immediately. He studied my face for a moment, and then he said quietly that something had happened to me. I sat down in the visitor's chair beside his bed, which I had never done before with any patient. I told him about the dream. I told him everything. I spoke for about 10 minutes without stopping, and he listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over to his bedside table and picked up his personal Bible, a worn, thick Arabic language Bible with a cracked spine and pages that had notes written in the margins in blue ink. He held it out to me with both hands. He told me to take it. He told me to read the Gospel of John first. He told me to read it the way I read a medical journal, carefully, without rushing, paying attention to every detail. I looked at that Bible for a long moment. Taking it felt like stepping off a ledge. I was a Muslim woman, a hijab-wearing, mosque-attending, Quran-reading Muslim woman from a Muslim family in a Muslim neighborhood. Taking that book felt like the most dangerous thing I had ever done. I took it. I put it at the bottom of my medical bag, underneath my stethoscope case and my prescription pad, where nobody would see it. I carried it home that evening on the bus, sitting with my bag on my lap and my hand resting on top of it, feeling like I was transporting something that was quietly, gently, absolutely changing the direction of my entire life. That night I opened to the Gospel of John and I began to read. I read until 2 in the morning. I read with a medical mind and an open heart, and by the time I put the Bible down, I was shaking, not from fear, from recognition. Like reading something you somehow already knew but had never seen written down before. Pastor Elias was discharged on the Thursday morning, 14 days after his admission. He walked out of St. George Hospital on his own 2 feet, which several of my colleagues privately admitted they had not expected. Detective Nassar's investigation had identified a suspect, a detail I was asked not to discuss publicly, and the threat level around the case had reduced significantly. Pastor Elias shook my hand at the hospital entrance, looked at me with those calm brown eyes, and told me that he would be praying for me every single day. He said it the way someone says goodbye when they know it is not really goodbye. I watched him walk to the car where George the deacon was waiting, and I felt something close in my chest. Not a bad closing, more like the closing of one chapter and the turning of a page. I had been reading that Bible every night for 2 weeks by then. I had read 3 John, then Luke, then Acts. I had been reading with a pen in my hand, underlining things, writing questions in the margins the way Pastor Elias had done. I had also, quietly and privately, begun talking to Jesus directly, not formally, not with any ritual, just talking, the way you talk to someone sitting in the same room as you. And every single time I did, that feeling returned. That warm, enormous, personal feeling that told me I was not talking to empty air. But I had told nobody, not my mother Nadia, not my colleague doctor, Rima Haddad, who was my closest friend at the hospital, nobody. That privacy ended on a Saturday afternoon in April when my mother came to visit my apartment and found the Bible on my coffee table, I had forgotten to put it away. I had been reading it that morning with a cup of coffee and left it open when I went to shower. I came out of the bathroom to find my mother standing in the middle of my living room holding it with both hands, staring at it the way you stare at something that makes no sense. She looked up at me and her face was a combination of confusion, hurt, and fear that I had never seen on her before in my life. What followed was the hardest conversation I have ever had, harder than telling a family their loved one did not survive. My mother cried. She did not shout. My mother was never a shouting woman. But the crying was worse. She asked me what had happened to me. She asked if I had lost my mind. She asked what my father, who had passed away in 2015, would say if he could see this. She held the Bible out to me like it was evidence of something terrible. I sat across from her at my kitchen table on Rue Sedani, and I told her the truth. I told her about the dream. I told her about the light and the name and the feeling. I told her about the weeks of reading and the private conversations and the growing certainty that had been building inside me like a slow sunrise that I could not stop and did not want to stop. She left my apartment without finishing her tea. She did not speak to me for 3 weeks after that day. Those 3 weeks were the loneliest of my life. My brother Tariq called me and told me I was destroying the family. 2 of my oldest friends from university stopped returning my messages. My aunt in Tripoli sent me a voice note that lasted 4 minutes and left me sitting on my bathroom floor afterward, staring at the tiles. I lost people I loved deeply, and I want to be honest about that, because any testimony that makes conversion sound easy and costless is not telling you the full truth. It cost me enormously. It felt many nights like grief. But through all of it, that presence never left. Not for a single night. 6 weeks after my mother found that Bible, I walked into the church of Saint Charbel on Gaitawi Street on a Sunday morning, alone, in my hijab, carrying Pastor Elias's worn Arabic Bible under my arm. I want you to picture that for a moment. A hijab-wearing Lebanese Muslim woman walking into a Maronite Christian church on a Sunday morning in East Beirut. People noticed. Of course they noticed. There were quiet glances, a few double takes, a whispered exchange between 2 elderly women near the entrance. I felt every single one of those looks land on me like small stones, but I kept walking. Pastor Elias was at the front of the church. He saw me the moment I came through the door, and that smile, that same unhurried, already knowing smile from room 14, spread across his face like he had been expecting me for weeks. Because I believe now that he had been. In prayer, he had been expecting me for weeks. I sat at the back. I listened to the entire service. When Pastor Elias preached, he spoke about a God who pursues people. A God who does not wait for people to find their way to him, but instead walks into the middle of their ordinary lives and calls them by name. He spoke about a love that is not earned and cannot be lost. He spoke about a Savior who entered the world not to condemn it, but to rescue it. Every word landed somewhere specific inside me. After the service, Pastor Elias led me to a small prayer room at the side of the church. His wife Marlene, a gentle woman with kind eyes, brought 2 cups of coffee and sat quietly in the corner. Pastor Elias opened his own Bible and we talked for nearly an hour. He answered every question I had been storing up for weeks. He was patient and careful, and never once made me feel that my background was something to be ashamed of or escaped from. Then he asked me if I was ready. I knew what he was asking, and I sat with that question for a long, quiet moment. I thought about my mother and Tariq and the friends who had pulled away. I thought about my career and my reputation and everything that carried my name in this city. I thought about all of it sitting on one side of a scale. And then I thought about that light, that name, that feeling that nothing in my 38 years had ever come close to matching. I told him I was ready. I prayed the most honest prayer of my life that afternoon in that small room in East Beirut. I did not use complicated language. I just told Jesus that I had seen him, that I had heard him, that I believed he was who he said he was, and that I was giving him everything: my career, my reputation, my family relationships, my past, my future, all of it. The moment I finished that prayer, something happened physically. A warmth moved through my entire body from the top of my head downward, like warm water being poured over me slowly. I sat completely still and let it move through me. Marlene, across the room, began to cry quietly. Pastor Elias had his eyes closed and his lips were moving. I sat in that chair and I wept, but they were not sad tears. They were the tears of someone who has been walking a very long road in the dark and has finally seen a light ahead and realized they are going to be all right. I was 48 days away from my 39th birthday, and I had just been born for the first time. The months that followed my decision were not easy, but they were not empty either. There is a difference between a hard season and a hopeless one, and I learned that difference in a very personal way during those months in Beirut. My professional life remained intact, which honestly surprised me. I had half expected word to spread through the hospital and create complications. Lebanese society is complicated that way. Religion sits in every room whether you invite it or not. But my work spoke for itself. I was still Dr. Fatima Khalil, the physician who had caught a poisoning that 3 other doctors had missed. That reputation protected me in ways I had not anticipated. What changed that work was more internal than external. I began praying before every difficult procedure, quietly, briefly, with my eyes open, standing at the scrub sink. I began seeing my patients differently, not as cases or files or bed numbers, but as people that God specifically loved and had placed in front of me for a reason. My colleague Dr. Rima had noticed the change before I told her anything. She told me one afternoon over lunch in the hospital cafeteria that I seemed lighter. She said she did not know what had happened to me, but that whatever it was, she wanted some of it. I told her everything. She was Christian herself, Greek Orthodox, not particularly practicing, and she listened with wide eyes and said nothing for a long time afterward. Then she said that she believed me. That simple sentence meant more to me that day than I can properly explain. My mother came back. That is the part that still makes me cry when I think about it. 8 weeks after she had walked out of my apartment, she called me on a Wednesday evening. She did not apologize directly. My mother was never a woman who apologized directly, but she asked if she could come for dinner on Friday. I said yes immediately. She came. I cooked her favorite meal, mokie with rice and chicken the way she had taught me. We ate together at my small kitchen table and talked carefully around the edges of everything for the first 2 hours. Then, near the end of the evening, she reached across the table and held my hand and said that she did not understand what had happened to me, but that I was still her daughter and that she was not going to lose me over it. I held her hand back and told her that was enough for now. And it was. Tariq took longer. My brother is a proud man, and pride takes more time to soften than fear does, but he came around eventually, slowly, quietly, in his own way. He never fully engaged with what I had experienced, but he stopped treating me like a stranger. For a family like ours, that was significant progress. Pastor Elias became a genuine mentor and friend. I attended Saint Chabel regularly, sitting at first at the back and eventually moving closer to the front as weeks became months. The congregation received me with a warmth that humbled me deeply. Several people told me privately that they had been praying for someone from a Muslim background to find their way to the church. I told them that God had been far more creative about the method than any of them could have planned. I also quietly removed my hijab. That was a deeply personal decision that came after months of prayer and reflection, and I will not reduce it to a single paragraph. It was not a rejection of my culture or my mother or my past. It was simply the outward expression of an inward change that had already happened completely. My mother cried again when she first saw me without it, but these tears were different from the ones in my apartment that Saturday afternoon. These were the tears of a mother trying to recognize her daughter in a new light. I gave her time. She found me again. A year after Pastor Elias was discharged from St. George Hospital, he invited me to speak at a special Sunday service at the Church of St. Charbel. He wanted me to share what had happened, not the medical details but the spiritual journey. He felt it was time. I was terrified. Standing in front of a congregation and saying out loud everything I have written here felt completely different from saying it privately in a prayer room or across a kitchen table. But I said yes. The Sunday I stood at that pulpit was the 22nd of March, 2020. Beirut was already beginning to feel the early tension of what would become a catastrophic year for Lebanon. But that morning, the church on Gaitawi Street was full. I stood at the microphone in a simple navy dress with my hair uncovered and my heart pounding so hard I was genuinely concerned about my own cardiac health. I spoke for 30 minutes. I told them about room 14, about the threatening phone call, about the dream and the light in the name, about the Bible hidden under my medical bag, about my mother's tears and my brother's silence and the loneliness of those first weeks. About the prayer room and the warmth that moved through me and the tears that were not sad. The church was completely silent the entire time, not an uncomfortable silence, the kind of silence that means everyone in the room is holding their breath because they do not want to miss a single word. When I finished, Pastor Elias stood up from the front row. He did not say anything immediately, he just started clapping, slowly at first. Then the entire congregation joined him, and the sound filled that old stone church and bounced off the walls, and I stood at that pulpit and wept openly and did not try to stop myself. But that was not the miracle I am referring to. After the service, a young woman approached me in the church courtyard. She was perhaps 25, wearing a dark coat, standing slightly apart from the groups of people talking around us. She had clearly been crying during the service. She told me quietly that she was Muslim, that she had come to the church that morning because a Christian friend had invited her, and she had almost not come. She told me that she had been having dreams she did not understand. She told me that for months she had felt something pulling at her from a direction she could not identify. She asked me what she should do. I took both her hands in mine and I stood with her in that courtyard in East Beirut on a cool March morning, and I told her exactly what Pastor Elias had told me a year before. I told her to keep following the pool. I told her that what she was feeling was not confusion. I told her it was an invitation from someone who had known her name long before she knew his. Her name was Yasmin. She gave her life to Jesus 4 weeks later in that same prayer room where I had given mine. That was when I understood completely what Pastor Elias had meant when he told me, lying in that hospital bed, that God's plan for me was bigger than medicine. He had not just meant my own healing. He had meant that my story was going to become a door for someone else. And Yasmin was only the first person to walk through it. I am still a doctor. I still work at St. George Hospital. I still live in Beirut. I still love my mother's maluki, and I still pray every morning before I go to work. But now I know who I am praying to, and the difference between praying into silence and praying into the face of someone who knows your name and loves you completely. That difference is everything. I want to speak directly to you now, not as a doctor, not as a convert, just as one human being to another, with everything I have learned written honestly on my heart. Pray. Not as a religious routine, but as a real conversation with a real person who is genuinely present and genuinely listening. I spent 20 years praying into what felt like silence. The moment I prayed to Jesus for the first time, I knew immediately that the silence was over. That kind of access is a gift beyond measure. Use it every single day. You do not need to have everything figured out before you respond. I certainly did not. I was a confused, frightened, thoroughly bewildered 38-year-old doctor sitting in a church prayer room in East Beirut with more questions than answers. All I had was honesty. I told him exactly what I saw and exactly what I felt and exactly what I needed. That was enough. It is always enough.